Welcome to Critical Conversations, an Arizona's Family Town Hall event. I'm Yetta Gibson.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Brandon Lee. Over the next hour, we're going to be talking to local civil rights leaders, activists, politicians, and law enforcement to reflect on the death of George Floyd and the civil unrest that's followed.
First, we're going to take a look back at how we got here.
Bro, you stopping his breathing right there, bro.
I can't breathe.
Bro, he's not even moving. Get off of his neck, bro. Get off of his neck. You gonna let him kill that man in front of you, bro? Huh?
The evening, May 25th, 2020. George Floyd, a 46-year-old unarmed black man, is killed after Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The days and weeks that have followed have irreversibly changed the conversation about race in America.
And I can't begin to tell you how outraged I am, but I know that that outrage is one that is shared by anyone who witnessed the video. So let me speak truth to power here. What we witnessed today was state-sponsored murder.
The next day, as the video of Floyd's death goes viral online, protests begin in the streets of Minneapolis.
No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. Prosecute the police.
That same day, all 4 officers involved were fired. And within days, Chauvin is arrested and charged in the killing. But by that time, the video of Floyd's death had already struck a nerve about the racial inequalities in America. Protests against police violence erupt in cities across the country, including right here in Phoenix.
In the 2.5 weeks that followed, demonstrators have been seen across the valley every night, most of them peaceful.
No justice, no peace.
Some escalating to confrontations between police and protesters.
We cannot let a small group propensity for violence and chaos direct our attention away from the very real conversation that needs to be had about race and policing in America.
Take a knee! Take a knee!
But ultimately, the anger turning to understanding, the passion into progress, which is what we hope to examine tonight as Arizona's Family has a critical conversation.
And it's more than just the color of someone's skin. You know what I mean? It's about love, basically. You know what I mean? I love everybody that I come in contact with. So it'll be nice for everybody to understand the same thing.
This is really the second civil rights movement, and to see so many people, so many of my peers out here supporting the cause, and you know, it's not easy to come, you know, march and protest and stuff for hours.
I have black nephews, I have black brothers, I have a black dad. It's really important for me to also not only be there for the people who have passed, but for them as well.
And joining us tonight for our lead conversation, Roy Tatum, president of the East Valley NAACP, and Janelle Wood from the Black Mothers Forum. Roy, I want to begin with you tonight. First off, thank you both for being with us and having this critical conversation. Roy, I really do think that we have seen more police reform happen in the past 3 weeks than we really have ever witnessed. Some police departments around our country have already banned the use of chokeholds. Breonna's law just passed recently in Louisville, Kentucky. A little bit of background. She was a 26-year-old black woman shot and executed during a no-knock warrant. Officers, they were not wearing body cameras. They were wearing plate clothes, and she was a frontline healthcare worker. Your reaction to some of the police reforms that we've already seen implemented in the past 3 weeks, and if you think they've gone far enough?
Some of the police reforms are past necessary, past that we've been calling for police reforms for the past 20 years. And so finally, America is responding to the call for justice and police reform. The police they're out of control. Unfortunately, whenever there's a conflict, people are conflating conflict for crime. And the police are responding very heavy-handedly, very militaristically, and they are killing black men, women, and children at the slightest sight of conflict. And so the police reforms that need to happen, they've not gone far enough. So we need to see much more in police reform and police culture ultimately.
Roy, could you talk specifically about what you would like to see?
Well, we definitely need to see a high level of accountability internally with the police department. It's been very difficult for police officers to be fired, disciplined, and even brought up on lawsuits. And so, qualified immunity protects police officers. They have another layer of protection around them more so than the average everyday citizen. So I believe, and many of us are believing in the Black community, that the police are operating with a license to kill. So police officers need to understand that they need to learn the Constitution. They need to understand what a free country looks like. We do not live in a totalitarian regime. We live in the United States of America, and the last time I checked, that means we live in a free country.
So we do have the police chief here. We're going to be talking to her in just a bit. I would like to hear what you are planning to do as someone, you know, a person of stature at the NAACP. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but I do want to bring in Janelle Wood. She is with the Black Mothers Forum. Could you tell me about the organization you're with?
Yes, Yetta, thank you for having us. Yeah, our organization was established in August of 2016 to address this very thing, to address the end of police brutality. We as Black mothers are too tired of seeing our young people murdered by the hands of individuals who've been given permission to do so repeatedly and to carry out their hatred for our young people, which we know has been decades of conditioning of negative images of our Black men and women. So we've decided enough is enough. We were going to get educated. We're going to get organized so we could take action against these types of dehumanizing and destructive practices that we've seen come from our police all across the nation.
And you know, Janelle, I can't imagine what it must be like as a mother of Black children, wondering if your child will even come home safe at the end of the night. I was watching CNN's town hall this week and was listening to Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom tell a story about her own husband inside of a department store simply wearing a hoodie. The mayor's husband was taken to the back of the police department store and he was questioned for shoplifting. At that moment, I looked at myself and thought to myself on the couch as I was in my own living room and said, my goodness, that has never once happened to me. And that is the white privilege that I am born into. And that the husband of the mayor of Atlanta is simply in a department store and taken to the back for questioning of shoplifting. How do we get past that, Janelle?
Well, we got to deal with the images. There's been some negative images that continue to be portrayed by the media, that continue to be portrayed by the systems that are currently in place. And those things have to be intentionally dismantled in how our people are being perceived. My Black son, he's well educated. He's articulate. We've taught him how to be respectful. And he can have the best of conversations with anybody because he's very, very articulate. But here's the thing, just like with the mayor's husband, doesn't matter because he is wrapped in Black skin and he is wrapped in this melanin that for so many decades has been taunted as something to be feared. And again, we're dealing with systems that were craftily put in place to make sure that they limit the movement of our Black bodies. And if they can't limit the movement of our Black bodies, then they exterminate us. And this is what we're seeing at the hands of a lot of our police officers that are there for those particular destructive purposes. I'm not saying all police officers that are that way. We know we have some really, really good and caring and kind police officers that are truly in our community to protect and serve. So I don't want to paint a broad brush over those officers who are out there doing the right thing. But we would like to see the officers who are out there to cause destruction and division and to carry out their little masochistic schemes. They need to go. And we need to make sure we put things in place to make sure they stay off the streets and away from our children.
Yeah, well said, Janelle. You know, I was going to ask you if you had a son, and it sounds like you have one. Is it just one son that you have?
I have one, and I love him dearly, and I don't want anything to happen to him because somebody else is having an off day and feels like he's a threat when he is not.
And with that being said, there's a lot of mothers who feel the same way. What kind of conversations, in your opinion, should we be having with our kids, whether they're sons or daughters? I mean, we're basically having to have conversations now to survive a police stop.
Yeah. And these are the conversations we've been having with our children, unfortunately, for generation after generation, that our young men and our young daughters have to move slowly. Because again, like I said, these systems that have been created and put in place have been created to limit their movements. Even when they're stopped, they have to watch how they move. They have to move slowly. They have to get permission to move. They have to make sure the officer's not jumpy. That's not our responsibility. Our children should be free, just like every other child in this nation, to be free, to be themselves, and to live out their God-given purpose. And we, as Black mothers, have said enough is enough. And when George Floyd called out for his mama, he evoked the mama spirit across this nation. And the sleeping giant called Black Mama, she has arisen, she is done, and we are not going to stop until we make sure every one of our Black children are safe from these particular horrific systems that have been put in place to kill our children. Our children are human beings, and they deserve every right to be free in America like everyone else is.
We hear you loud and clear. Janelle Wood, very well said. Thank you. I do want to bring Roy back in really quickly with only about 20 seconds left. What are the next steps for you with the NAACP?
Well, the next steps are to make sure that our legislators, state, local, federal, are making proper steps to enact legislation. We need policy change. We need accountability. We need to see some serious, significant, and sustainable change within the community of policing. And the police need to be held to a higher account. They should be trained, they should be screened, they should be well educated, they should be the most professional people in the community. And so the NAACP has even had to produce this form right here, what to do when you're pulled over by the police. I tell you, any community event that we go to, these, we can't keep enough of them because so many parents want to have conversations or need to know conversations in the legal rights and responsibilities of their children when they're driving, or of their sons, their husbands, their cousins, their uncles, their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. And so we need to make sure that, and I want the police to have these as well, because they need to understand what we're talking about when people are pulled over. I've asked a number of times, every time we have a meeting, what is it that you expect? What prevents you from pulling your gun? Why do you have your hand on your gun? What is your training when you approach a vehicle that makes you put your hand on your gun?
Right.
When can a person be safe when they interact with you?
Roy, Roy Tatum, president of the East Valley NAACP, and Janelle Woods from the Black Mothers Forum. Just want to take this moment to say thank you to both of you for coming to this town hall and enlightening us a little bit this evening. We hope to continue this conversation with you in the future, and hopefully this is just step one of that conversation.
And we know you have a lot to say, but we are running tight on time. We will hear more from you, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And coming up next on this special report tonight, my sit-down interview with Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego on the other side.
Still ahead.
When you're in a position like myself, or you have a position like I do, I think it's irresponsible to sit and be quiet and just write a check and give it to an organization and say, you do it.
A powerful message. How the Suns coach is making an impact with his players off the court. But first,
we have to have, as a country, a real conversation about what we're doing and how we can do better.
Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego sits down with me talking about solutions she wants for our community.
Invested in community, invested in protecting the lives of those most vulnerable to police violence, yes, that would make us safer.
My thoughts are it's insane. Why would you want to defund the police? I have not heard a rational explanation for that yet.
Well, mayors across the country definitely have a lot on their plates right now. Many of these protests are calling on police reforms and defunding police departments.
In fact, the way police officers are being trained is also now taking center stage. For more on that, I had a chance to sit down with Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego for a very lengthy conversation. Here is part of my 20-minute conversation. Mayor, thank you for taking the time. I know you've been incredibly busy talking about, obviously, COVID in the community, and now we have issues of racial injustice and protests happening every single night here in Metro Phoenix. I want to talk to you a little bit about implicit bias training and de-escalation training. Is it mandatory for Phoenix police officers to undergo implicit bias training annually?
One of the things I'm really proud of that we've done this year is totally rehauled the way we do training at the Phoenix Police Department. We used to go to a military style training where it was really very similar to what you would see before you went into combat. Now we're doing more scenario-based training where people can really go out there and practice the situations that they're going to see out in the field. We have implemented implicit bias training and de-escalation training. We also now have training where officers are put in a situation where another officer is violating policy and they cannot graduate unless they show that they will stand up and say, here is what the policy is, we have to do the right thing here.
Have you seen an improvement within the police department since implicit bias training and de-escalation training had been implemented?
We have gotten both positive feedback from our officers and our community. The new training really recognizes the fact that our officers are out there working independently, that they have a huge number of situations that they have to deal with, and that we should equip them as best as we can with those real tools out there, because you cannot predict what will happen out in the community, but you can prepare.
I want to take you to a situation that happened in upstate New York, in Buffalo, New York, where there was a peaceful protester and he was pushed backwards by two officers. Those officers were suspended. The next day, more than 50 of those officers resigned from the riot police force. There's been a real issue of toxicity within police departments across the country. Do you believe that there is that same toxicity here within the Phoenix Police Department?
It was hard to watch the footage from Buffalo, and certainly I hear that there's still been a difficult recovery for the man who was implemented. There's been a lot of footage that have been difficult to watch, and I hope inspires all of us to do better. What our officers have told me is there's no one who is more frustrated by a bad cop than a good cop. I believe that we have to have safe communities, and we have to better equip our officers to deal with the huge amount of challenges that come before them. Our officers care about the community and want to do the right thing. But we have to have, as a country, a real conversation about what we're doing and how we can do better. We've committed as a city to take a hard look and have real conversations about where we have fallen short and where we can do better, including a comprehensive look at de-escalation and training. I hope we've been willing to have hard conversations here, but bringing everyone to the table. If our entire community agrees something can be better, then it's much more likely to succeed.
Breonna's Law was just recently passed, and I want to kind of go through line by line and get your reaction, parts of Breonna's Law, and to see if that's something that the city of Phoenix should be adopting. Body cameras must start recording no less than 5 minutes before a search warrant is executed. Do you agree?
We this year have fully implemented body cameras out on all of our frontline personnel. I think that is incredibly valuable and really protects everyone involved. So I think the more we can use body cameras, the better both our community and our officers will have as an experience.
Another part of Breonna's Law is that body camera footage must be kept for a minimum of 5 years.
We have really looked hard at how we use body camera footage in this community and making it more available. One of the most difficult things is the amount of data, and so I've supported additional investments in how we can produce that data and get it out in our community. We've really made an effort this year to get data out as transparently as possible. I think it does make sense to maintain it as long as possible.
Very good insight from the mayor.
Absolutely. And by the way, we have posted the full 18-minute interview on our website, azfamily.com. And we are continuing this very critical conversation with two of the top law enforcement figures in our state. Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams is joining us today, along with Arizona State Attorney General Mark Brnovich. Hello to both of you, and thank you for being here. Chief, I would love to begin with you. Your department just recently banned the use of the carotid control technique. It's a technique that essentially slows the blood flow to the brain, causing a person to black out. What happened in the past 2 to 3 weeks since the death of George Floyd that contributed to that conversation for you to decide to ban that technique?
So first and foremost, thank you for beginning the process of having this difficult conversation. Off air, I shared that the 18 days that we've had with the different protests and demonstrations are bringing us to this place right now. That decision to ban the carotid control technique was definitely not one that I took lightly, but in light of what's going on across our country, that is something that we as a police department can show to our community that we're really listening.
And just one follow-up question to that technique. How often was that technique employed by your officers over the past few years, if you have that answer?
So I don't have the answer for the last 3 years. I do know in the last year or so it had been utilized appropriately in at least 10 instances. I could be off 1 or 2 steps. But in all honesty, we have other tools and other techniques that we're going to be training our employees on. And at today's date and time and what's going on in our country, it was just a better move for the police department as well as the community all the way around.
Chief, can we talk about the conversations that you're having now with your police officers? Right now, just being stopped by a police officer can be scary. How do you believe that we can start to undo just the thought of something happening on a police stop?
So great question, Yetta. Thank you for that one. At the end of the day, it's all about the professionalism of the men and women who wear the uniform that we wore. You heard the mayor talk about our implementation and rollout of body-worn cameras. So anytime we make a stop, we're rolling tape and we have that tape available. My conversation with my employees is continue to be the professional agency that we've known to be while still listening to our community members and ensuring the safety and security of each person in the community.
I hate to ask you this, Chief, but I was listening to President Trump this morning talking about how small of an amount of bad cops there are out there. How do you even begin to identify who's a bad cop and who's a good cop before something like this happens?
So we are working through the process. If memory serves everyone correctly, we began the process of talking about an early intervention system last year after some of the incidents that happened. So we're working through the process of getting that early intervention system up and started in the next coming months. That'll be a great way for us to identify challenges with my employees, but we're also encouraging our employees through policy as well as in talk and conversation with them in briefing that if something is going on with their fellow peer officer, it is their responsibility to let us know that. We've also stood up an extensive employee assistance unit because we understand that mental health of officers is critical to them being great police officers out there.
So it's almost like looking for signs of distress or something like that.
Chief Williams, going to take you to San Francisco and just kind of talk to you about what they're implementing up there within their police department. Police officers are now going to be replaced with trained, unarmed professionals to respond to calls for help on non-criminal matters involving issues like mental health, the homeless, school discipline, and neighbor disputes. Right now, so many police officers are shouldering the burden for these mental health calls. And do you agree with what the city of San Francisco is by hiring outside people, training them to be unarmed to answering some of those calls?
So I think, Brandon, to answer your question, Arizona is a different state than California. San Francisco is a different city than Phoenix is. But what I can tell you here is as of February of last year, we began the process of offboarding some of the calls we get into our 911 call center that are mental health calls and giving those to a mental health system so that at the end of the day, the Phoenix Police Department, or as I say, someone in blue, doesn't have to respond to that mental health call. You're actually getting the right person for the right reason at the right time. And we're running about 400 of those calls every month. So we are offboarding that. And we built that partnership through relationships and through working with our system. So that's definitely a great conversation and hopefully something we can do exponentially to make us better.
And I walk you through a little bit here, the Justice in Policing Act. I'm going to kind of read through some of these and get your initial gut reaction before we bring in Attorney General Mark Brnovich on these same issues. The Justice in Policing Act would set a national standard for use of force. It would expand independent investigations into police misconduct. It would also establish a national police misconduct registry. Your thoughts on that, about creating a registry for the misconduct of police officers so you don't have one bad apple from, let's say, Phoenix PD, then moving to Boston and that bad apple going over into that community?
So I think most of you know I was named as one of 3 police chiefs in the country to the U.S. Conference of Mayors to really go through police reform and go through line by line. In our topics and conversations that we've had 2 web meetings. We've talked about that national registry so that if Jerry Williams goes someplace else and I've been terminated or severely disciplined, that record is there. So I am all about, or the Phoenix Police Department is all about, transparency and accountability. We will never go too far or stray far from that. So if a national registry offers the opportunity for other agencies to find someone who shouldn't be a police officer, I'm definitely for it. Here in Phoenix, we do extensive background checks. If you've come from another agency as a lateral, we're definitely going to call that other agency and check things out. So having that as a piece and a component, I'm in agreement with.
Chief, I do want to ask you one more question. I do want to say first that you have had a tremendous amount on your plate since you have become chief. I do want to acknowledge that. And I also want to ask you just a personal scope into you, not just as a police chief. How are you towing the line between being a black woman in this society with what's going on and trying to keep the police force on track and do the right thing? How are you balancing those 2 things?
So my lens is a very unique one, Yetta, so thank you for mentioning that. I balance it by being true to myself and true to the core values of pride of the Phoenix Police Department. We are about professionalism, respect, integrity, dedication, and employee excellence, and we've not strayed from that. My lens to my employees is to continue to make sure that when the challenging days or nights are ahead, that we stay and we remain focused, and that we stay committed to our job, and that's protecting and serving the community. And in the 18 days of the different protests, not one person wavered to show up and answer the call. And quite frankly, with the thousands that we had downtown too, we also had calls for service going on. So just a gentle reminder that we're still operating and functioning, and the fact that we hold one another to high standards is what's going to keep us moving forward.
Well, Chief, you're doing a great job, and I cannot imagine being in your position. Thank you for being here. We're going to move over now to Attorney General Mark Brnovich. Good. I was going to say good morning. You know, I'm usually on in the morning.
She's used to the mornings. She's used to the mornings.
Good morning to you. Thank you for being here. I would like to ask you this first question. I want to know your thoughts about what's going on right now. What are your personal thoughts about what's going on in our world, in our nation, in our city?
I think any human being that saw the video of George Floyd being killed, essentially by the government, their heart cannot help but break. And you cannot help but ask yourself, how many more people have to die before we come up with transformative changes or changing some of the culture in some of our law enforcement agencies? And so I've tried to come up with some proposals. I think that really we could all work together in trying to make a positive change and trying to make a difference.
You know, you talk about the culture that needs to be changed. I want to talk to you about the demilitarization of police departments across this country since about 2002. And if we can, Jake, my director, if we can pull up one of the pictures from the LA Unified Police Departments, and to show you the kind of military vehicles that they own and that they use in their city. We have it right here. So LA Public Schools is now going to be returning one of these military style vehicles. In fact, it's a mine resistant, ambush protected vehicle. And my question to you, Mr. Brnovich, is that should police departments, whether it be MCSO or even a local police municipality, should they be able to buy military style weapons and vehicles from the military?
Brandon, I think the bigger problem is really about the mentality. And so let's not even focus on the word change. Let's focus on the word growth or transformative. And one of the things that I've said is what we need to get back to is folks in law enforcement not only being part of the community, but appreciating that they're guardians. They're not warriors. They're not part of the military. And obviously there are situations where, for example, when Los Angeles created its SWAT department in the 70s, that was a result of having heavily armed criminals that were involved in standoffs. trade-offs, and so, you know, they tried to develop techniques that would help them level the playing field. That being said, you know, we have to get back to this notion that the law enforcement is there to be part of our community and to be guardians, not to be warriors. They aren't. It isn't us versus them. It's not about being pro-police or anti-police, pro-protester, anti-protester. It's about being pro-community.
And Mark, I just have a question. So Arizona historically has had a bad rap when it comes to race relations, let's be honest. And I'm talking about, you know, Sheriff Joe and the accusations of racial profiling, the rocky history with Martin Luther King Jr. Day. With that being said, how realistic is it for people to believe that there can be real change here in Arizona, you think?
Well, the time is now, and one of the things that I talk to about every single employee, we have more than 1,000 employees at the Attorney General's office. Everyone on our team hears my speech when I talk about the fact that when you're law enforcement, you don't count success in terms of arrests, you don't count success in terms of prosecutions. It should be, has justice been done? And I think sometimes, you know, I grew up here in Arizona, and we have had some embarrassing moments, but the reality is this is a great state. Our best days are in front of us, and I think we need to focus yet on how can we ensure that justice is done. What can we do to make sure people have confidence in our justice system? And there are things that I think we need to do right now. The time for talk is over. The time for relying on Washington, D.C. to solve our problems, it's not going to happen. We as a community, we as people need to come together and say, this is unacceptable. This is what we're going to do to address these issues so we can grow together and get ahead, and so we don't have these problems and we don't have issues when it comes to use of force here in our law enforcement community.
I wish we had 2 hours
Yes.
because I really wanted to ask you, Mr. Brnovich, about qualified immunity, because I know that is something that you have been very outspoken about. Qualified immunity, obviously not allowing civilians to sue a police officer for actions they've undertaken on the job. If I give you 20 seconds, could you answer that, Mr. Brnovich, about ending qualified immunity?
Brandon, that's a statute. It's in our statutes, and it is a complex question. We probably need about 2 hours, 2 days to start talking about this. This is the key, though. There is a moment of opportunity. The time for talk or commissions is done. We need to have real meaningful change, bring us together. And as Martin Luther King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can. And remember, we have more in common that separates us as Arizonans. So now is the time to actually get stuff done and to have meaningful conversations. Not only conversations, get stuff done.
Mark Brnovich, that is well said, and there's a lot of promise in what you're saying. Thank you for being here, Chief Jerry Williams. We're always happy to see you. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can bring you back as we continue these conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Still ahead.
And I wanted to really emotionally engage in what was transpiring.
Athletes in the Valley working to create change in sports and society.
I wanted to not only get accurate information, but also gauge what my true feelings and emotions would be like. I mean, where he was killed is less than a mile from where I spent the vast majority of my childhood, and I wanted to really emotionally engage in what was transpiring.
After the death of George Floyd and protests that followed, Cardinals legend Larry Fitzgerald left Arizona to go home to Minneapolis.
And Fitzgerald says he then took time to internalize everything before writing his feelings down for a New York Times essay. And let me tell you, it's a powerful read. If you want to see the whole thing, we do have a link to it on our website, azfamily.com. And while we're in the sports area, Suns head coach Monty Williams, he's also explaining why he chose to write an open letter asking for change here in America.
And it was our Nick King sharing more about how he believes the organization can help make that change.
When you're in a position like myself, or you have a position like I do, I think it's irresponsible to sit and be quiet and just write a check and give it to an organization and say, you do it.
Monty Williams told us he wrote that open letter over the weekend in order to effect change. And while he says he doesn't have a solution that's going to solve all of society's problems, he does have some starting ideas for the Suns.
We're going to have to take time to meet with our police departments and chiefs. We're going to have to, if we can, spend time with our city and state officials, whether it's town hall meetings or coming to our practice site or us taking time out of our schedules to go meet with them and talk about the issues that have affected us or things that we see.
Williams says he hopes that would at least get more people talking. if they can see what the black community sees.
You can't fix the problem if you don't understand what's going on. And I think that's what many blacks are in an uproar about right now, because they feel like nobody understands what's going on. They don't understand the inequality in the healthcare system or school systems and just general living in a neighborhood. Like, it is generally hard for Black people in this country, and it has been. When you feel like it's systematic, that's a lonely, helpless place. And when you feel like nobody understands that, that's even lonelier.
Williams says he, James Jones, and Robert Sarver had a virtual meeting with players earlier this week.
Basically wanting them to know that we validate, support, and are here for them, but especially their feelings. Like, don't feel like you haven't done anything. Like, what we do in the community, it does stuff. Like, what we do in sports, it does stuff to bring people together. Like, we got to continue that.
Coming up next, raw emotions.
This is not the first time. And this is not the first time you ignored the rights of people.
Why the death of George Floyd started a movement, and how the next generation is making sure people are being held accountable.
Our next conversation going to be looking at how the younger generation and the older generation can somehow work together for change and healing.
We're going to lead off this conversation with some of the younger voices. Community activist Caitlin Harris-Lange and Tremaine Jasper, owner of the Phoenix website, phoenixsoul.com. This is a publication that represents events and, of course, the voices of people of color. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start with Caitlin, and I want to talk about first what I have seen with these protests. I've seen people, young, old, people of all different colors. I'm wondering why you think that is happening right now with this one in particular. I mean, we've had, unfortunately, a lot of these instances happening in our world, but for this one, it's different.
Yeah, I've been really motivated by all of the people coming together. I think in Phoenix, this is something, as the civic engagement chair for the Greater Phoenix Urban League Young Professionals, we've been calling for, is to really make lasting change. We all really need to be in this together. We need our older generations. We need them sharing their wisdom with us, and we also need them giving us a seat at the table, extending their power, their connections, bringing us into these discussions so we can help carry this change forward. And I think it's just at a tipping point. I think all of the media coverage is important. We're all sheltering in place. We're at home. We're seeing all of these things in a way that maybe it's for some people hasn't been as in their face previously.
Hey, Caitlin, talk to me a little about some of the conversations that you've been having with some of your friends and perhaps even friends of yours in the white community. What have those conversations been like, and have your white friends been more open to listening to what you have to say and perhaps taking a look at life through the lens of your eyes?
Yeah. So I'd say two things. One, with the Urban League, with the young professionals, we've hosted some virtual events meant to, we titled it, "It's Okay to Not Be Okay," and give a space for people of color to really process. And we had a mental health counselor lead that discussion. So I think some people are really overwhelmed right now. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of hope. It's a lot of action and frustration. But then there are people also who are leaning in, who are calling people in. We talked about, instead of calling people out for things that are not productive, for statements that hurt, calling people in, having more of those critical conversations like we're having tonight. And I actually had a conversation with a previous colleague today about things that she's thinking about doing, about commitment, and it's centered on compensation in the workplace and how we're ensuring, how are we looking at equitable compensation for women, for people of color. How are we making that transparent? Because giving people that economic mobility, paying them fairly for their work is an important step, and taking oppression and restrictions off of people so that they can thrive and they can give back to their community in a greater way.
Caitlin, I hate to ask you this because you never ask a woman her age, but I'm wondering what is the age group of the people that you are dealing with? And I'm wondering how you feel about the protests and if you're thinking that maybe the energy that is being used in these protests should maybe transition into other forms of being heard.
Yes, so the young professional group that I'm a part of, we are ages 21 to 40. Although we will take support from people outside of that range, I think giving us money and the finances to do bigger things to reach more people and giving us some of the power over that to deliver these programs is important. I am 31. I just had my 31st birthday last weekend, luckily. So I think we're seeing a lot of movement. The Urban League Young Professionals, we're an organization where you can come, you can get involved in a variety of ways, from economic empowerment. We talk about financial literacy, community service. That's how I've been connected to Tremaine and Dr. Lester and Janelle Wood. We've had her speak to our members before, and civic engagement. We have town halls with elected officials and share out things that the action that people are doing in the community.
All right, Kaylee, we're going to put all your information up on our website, azfamily.com. We're going to pose the same question to Tremaine Jasper. He's with Phoenix Soul, and you are a voice in the African American community. And I just want to ask, what is it that you're communicating right now with the people who are on your social feeds?
Yeah, right now it's really important for people to find out where the protests and marches are happening in the Valley of the Sun. So I've got a list of all the upcoming marches and protests that I know about.
Okay.
I'm posting them on my website, all of my social media. So I encourage other organizers who are planning protests and just haven't really got the word out yet to visit my website. I've got a simple form they can fill out to allow me to get that information on the
Tremaine,
website.
I want to know if you have a specific message to the people who follow your feeds about what should be happening, the conversations, and even if you think that the protests should be continuing and if that energy should be channeled elsewhere to hear the voices and to hear the concerns and the calls for change.
I encourage the entire community to get behind these protests and just the call for police reform. There's a saying that's been constantly repeated out there. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, you see an image of a policeman, putting his neck on George Floyd until he dies. I mean, if that doesn't call to your heart to want to do something about racism and about police brutality, I don't really know how to help you otherwise.
Well, Caitlin and Tremaine, want to just say thank you to the both of you, young activists here in our community, trying to make change in our community. That's the younger generation. Yeah. Let's go ahead and now move to the older generation. ASU, and I'm not calling you old, ASU English professor, Dr. Neil Lester.
This age thing, you got to be careful.
I got to be real careful. But you know what? It's good to see you, Dr. Lester. You and I teamed up a few years back talking about the Green Book, and we did a special report on the Green Book here in the Valley. So it's good to see you again. Listen, Doctor, I've got to talk to you about this. As somebody who knows history as well as you do, and we look back at the protests that happened, Dr. Martin Luther King and the rallies that he was fighting for, and even the Reverend Al Sharpton. And now we're seeing this young generation of not just Black Americans, but it is diversity. There are white people, brown people, Asians, and Blacks who are down there in downtown Phoenix, and they are marching, saying together, Black Lives Matter. What is the difference that you're seeing now compared to times in the past?
Well, what's interesting now is that people are seeing this in ways that people haven't always seen it, quite literally. So I think what's interesting about this is I don't actually see as much division or difference in terms of ages as you are constructing there. What I see is an intergenerational thread of American racism that has persisted. So it's not a matter of old people versus young people. It's how those experiences in the past have continued into the present, even into elementary schools now, where little kids are being subjected to all kinds of racially problematic pedagogy in the classroom. So I'm not quite seeing that division that you are. I also would sort of hesitate a little bit about suggesting that only what we see on television as a protest is the only way that people are out there trying to affect change.
And Doctor, I want to take this moment, if we can call up one of our viewer questions, and would love to even have you respond to this viewer's question. If we can we pull that up, Jake? There it is. Here's the question. Whistleblower police officers have no rights and protections in Arizona. If they report bad police or upper command unprofessional behavior, they're fired or retaliated against. And I guess the question I want to ask you, Doctor, is that does there need to be a system in place where a good cop can feel safe reporting a bad cop without that good cop fearing retaliation against him?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's really not in my area of expertise. So I would have to defer that to someone who studies police. What I can say is that the conversation for me needs to move beyond trying to isolate police as one part of society. I'd also like to look at the fact that the police don't necessarily exist in a vacuum. These police go home to families, and some of the stuff that we have seen that police have been guilty of has nothing to do with what they did in uniform. It has to do with what they posted on social media. So for one thing, I think the conversation needs to be more nuanced than it is now, because it becomes too easy to imagine that we can have a solution to something that is centuries old and way more complicated than a quick, it feels like this is sort of like a crash course. All of a sudden, people are sort of spinning around and trying to figure out what to do as though we've got some test at the end of next week. And that's what's distressing. So that is bigger than the police, and it is bigger than intergenerational divides.
I totally agree. I do have one last question for you before we let you go, Doctor. I know we're in a pandemic and I know school has been canceled. I'm wondering if you had any of your students reach out to you to just talk and ask questions. And what are they saying if you have?
Well, it's students and colleagues. I mean, what's interesting to me is students have said, thank you for teaching the class that you taught in African American literature and culture. Could have never imagined that we would be living some of the stuff that we have read about in James Baldwin, we have read about in Toni Morrison. So I think the issue, again, is the ways in which the past and the present have become merged. And I'm so glad to be in a classroom where my students are recognizing that there is legitimacy to these literary texts that I am teaching.
We are so glad you're there. We're so glad you're there for that very reason. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, Dr. Neil Lester, you're such a joy to talk with. You are just so rich with knowledge, and I can't wait to continue the conversations because I would love to have an offline conversation. Heck, we can have it online, talking about Black culture and how a subsection of our white community across this country, they love to cheer on a Black athlete when they're on the field. But when it comes to that person's personal story, where is that support? We're going to have to hold that question for next time, Dr. Neil Lester. As always, thanks for joining us. We'll be right back after this break.
So I'll be here.
Thank you so much.
Up next, our critical conversations continue right here on Arizona's Family. What leaders are doing to heal a community.
In order for change to happen, it's going to take an entire community and laws to support change.
And joining us right now to talk about what might actually be done at our Arizona State Capitol, joining us right now is Democratic State Representative Reginald Boulding. Mr. Boulding, thanks for taking the time to be with us today, and I want to get right to it. We are limited in time tonight, unfortunately. The New York State Assembly just passed the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act by a vote of 140 to 3. Could you see the Arizona State Legislature unifying as the New York State Assembly did to pass something like this?
You know, the great thing is right now here in the legislature, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you know that there's a problem and there's an issue. And what I know for sure is that we have votes both in the House and the Senate to get key reforms passed. The only thing it's going to take is for us to actually be forced down there and do it. I believe in our colleagues down there. I know that we know that there's areas of common ground, and now is the time for us to do it.
Representative, we are about to close. We only have about 45 seconds. I do want to ask you personally, what would you like to see happen immediately? I mean, obviously, this is going to take more conversations and more listening, but what do you want to see immediately as a lawmaker here in Arizona, personally?
You know, personally, we have to be at a position where our communities, they don't fear the police. When you get inside of a car and you look in your rearview mirror and you see a cop car, you're at a position where you're not nervous, you're not scared. And the only way that happens is if there's complete transparency, accountability, and training. And hopefully, you know, through the legislature, we're able to actually make that a reality here in Arizona. And I believe in our state, and I believe we can make it happen.
Representative, we got to stop you there. Thank you. Well said. Thank you for being here. Brandon, good to be with you tonight to have these conversations, at least start listen and talk.
The very beginning. This, my friends, is just step one of our critical conversations as we move forward. As always, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you back here for the next time.
Have a great night.